Welcome everybody, both online and here around, to our roundtable entitled "Why are Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity Policies Important in the Academia?" Thank you very much for being here with us. Why are equality, diversity and inclusivity policies important in the academia? It may sound like a superfluous question to some of us. More on this in a minute. First, I'd like to invite our participants on the roundtable to introduce themselves. We decided we do it that way, that we all get a chance to present ourselves. And we do it in alphabetical order, which means that I will start with Shardia, Briscoe-Palmer sitting next to me.
Thank you, Petra. Hi all, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Shardia Briscoe-Palmer. I am an assistant professor at the University of Nottingham. I'm also a convener on the Teaching and Learning Specialist Group for ECPR. And my journey or interest in ED&I comes both professionally in regards to, what I research and what's been published, but also from my own experiences as well. I've published previously in 2016, looking at ED&I in regards to doctoral students and challenges that are faced by women, those that identify as disabled, and race. And again, a more recent paper on the gendered career progression and perspectives in regards to political science. I also co-authored a chapter with Dr. Kate Mattox from the University of East Anglia, and that was put into the ECPR's 50th anniversary book, which unfortunately didn't get the publicity that it should have or deserved because of COVID. The book was supposed to be launched during the conference of 2020, and obviously we all know what took place there. And so that focus on ED&I, that focus on diversity, race, intersectionality didn't get the attention it should have, and also the research that went into that many scholars, and I often get contacted about what was inside that chapter, you could argue is hidden. And so I continue to push forward to share, to disseminate some of the work that I've done there. I'll leave it there and I'll let you move on. Thank you.
Thank you, welcome. As you might have seen, we have one of our panelists joining us online, Assem Dandashly, who is in Beirut for the moment. Assem, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Thank you, Petra, and thanks for the organizers for including me in such an interesting panel and selling topic. My name is Assem Dandashly. I'm originally from Lebanon, where I am at the moment for the next few days. I work at the University of Maastricht University, where I am an assistant professor at the political science department. I did my PhD at the University of Victoria under Amy's Verdong's supervision. I do work on EU democracy promotion, human rights, civil liberties, and I have been working on issues related to LGBTIQ+, and the role of the EU in promotion of LGBT rights in the Middle East and North Africa. And I do work on EU promotion of democracy, as I said, and that's where I come from in this, or my contribution will be focusing on. But also I am myself come from a visible, you can call it a visible minority, or my background coming from the Arab world, also in terms of religious affiliation, etc. So I will share some of my experience. We're studying in the US, Canada, and working in Europe and Canada over the past almost 2 decades, basically. And I do publish on EU MENA relations, as I said, in terms of human rights, in terms of minority rights, in terms of democracy. And I think that's about me. So thanks again for including me in the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Merli Tamtik, and I am an associate professor at the Faculty of Education from the University of Manitoba, Canada. And I would like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. And everything that we do, the research that I conduct, we try to make sure that we respect the treaties that were made on these lands, and we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. We dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Like I said, I'm not a political scientist. My research is coming from education, the field of education. And particularly, I'm interested in higher education policies, and education policies in general. I've also, being in Manitoba, working there since 2016, I've kind of leaned towards looking more on knowledge politics and knowledge hierarchies, because there are a huge Indigenous community and population in Manitoba, which has kind of triggered my research towards Indigenous knowledge, looking at that as well. I also want to recognize my privilege. Being a white person in this very white space, which is ECPR, I find. At the same time, I want to recognize that I'm also a woman and immigrant in Canada, which makes me somewhat marginalized in a space where everybody is are native speakers, and I'm not. I do have an accent. My accent gives me certain privileges because being a white person, and the accent from Eastern Europe might give me a particular edge over others, because in Canada, it's so important to kind of talk about where the people come from, what's the heritage. However, my accent is different from somebody else's accent. And I have a privilege of coming from Eastern Europe. I'm originally from Estonia, over somebody else, maybe a racialized person. So I want to recognize that as well. I also want to say that I'm not an expert in equity, diversity, and inclusion, but I've done some work on looking at institutional policies that target equity, diversity, and inclusion in Canada, particularly across the U15 universities, which are the top research-intensive universities in Canada. And our federal government has mandated that every institution, every university has an EDI policy. Otherwise, you're not getting research funding. So it's very directly tied to politics. So I'm not an expert. However, I'm happy to contribute to my personal perspectives on the topic. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Reeta Tremblay, and I have been in the profession for more than 4 decades as a graduate student. So lots of you weren't born at that time, and so most of my panelists weren't born. And so I just retired, and I was a professor of comparative politics of Global South, and right now, and I've done various things in my life. So what I want to hear in terms of giving you some background, issues of diversity and myself seem to be intertwined for the last 4 decades. As a graduate student, I came from India to study at the University of Chicago. I was in a class of maybe 150 grad students. I was one of the 4 or 5 females, and probably only one who was of different color. And maybe rare ones specializing in Global South. But I was also very fortunate when I came, the debates in the United States at that time, very much in political science, had to do with debates about nomothetic versus ideographic research, quantitative versus qualitative. Suddenly Foucault and Reeta were introduced to the United States campuses. Homi Bhabha was being talked about. And so it was really, really a good time to be there. Unfortunately, my focus was more or less on Global South and post-colonialism and not really going towards quantitative material. And I also was very fortunate to have supervisors who really believed in causal pluralism and methodological pluralism. So I kind of lived very happily there. But the debates actually did make me feel very uncomfortable at that time. We were forced in University of Chicago to take a quantitative courses. SPSS became mandatory and survey analysis became mandatory. So I just, at that time, my husband and myself, we moved to Canada with much more hospitable environment particularly for people who'd worked on qualitative research. And also in Canada at that time, it was really developing a Canadian political science and really pushing away itself from the American so-called behavioral revolution. And so from that respect, I was more comfortable, but I was very, very uncomfortable because I had hard time finding a job because I was getting an American degree. So it was really anti-Americanism at that time. Finally, I found a job in Montreal. I was the first woman hired in a department of 22 men. And for several years, I was the only female faculty member. I was the first female faculty chair of the department. I did decide to go into the administration because of the need to change and bring diversity in my department, in the academy. So from there, moved to a dean's position in another university. I was eventually vice president and provost in 2 universities and at the University of Victoria, and finally back to the department to my political science degree. But it's really, really important for me to say that I always believed in so where I'm coming from diversity, that it was an issue, for example, in the initial stages, gender equality, gender participation, underrepresentation, curriculum, that it was only possible through the department to do it when there were no official policies. And as my colleague just mentioned, that Canada has a very government-driven equity agenda. And so universities have come to accept the equity EDI proposals and EDI stuff. So diversity has become a big business. And so when I was a dean and a provost, so had to push the diversity agenda. But I can tell you that at a personal level, you can push the diversity agenda, but at the systemic level, it became really, really hard. So we can talk more about it when we go through the discussion. So thank you.
Okay, this gives you an idea on who's around the table, virtually or here. So my name is Petra Meier. I have the pleasure to chair this roundtable. As you might know, I'm a member of the executive committee of the ECPR, and for the rest, I'm a political scientist at the University of Antwerpen, Belgium. There's one more person I would like to mention, which is Amy Verdong. Amy is a professor in political science, also at Victoria. I'm probably known by many of you as a specialist in European integration and political economy. She's also a member of the ECPR Executive Committee, and very importantly, she's the one chairing our recently established working group on equality, diversity, and inclusivity policies. And it's she who pulled together this roundtable. So thank you, Amy, for that. Now, while the ECPR as an organization has been working on gender awareness and gender equality, and come some way, we still have a long way to go when it comes to broader equality, diversity, inclusivity issues. Hence, the working group on EDI matters that has been established during this legislature, and that is led by Amy as one of the core topics to focus on for the executive committee. This roundtable for us this afternoon is meant as a kind of learning platform to learn from each other and to learn together. We aim for an open discussion on these matters, equality, diversity, inclusivity issues within the ECPR as an organization, but also the discipline of political science across Europe. To that end, we kind of established 3 sets of questions, thematic questions, one on the underlying aim or benefit of equality, diversity, inclusivity, one on the problems related to those topics, and one on possible ways, solutions to overcome a couple of the issues. Now, I guess that many of you have lots of things to say on those topics too, but you have to be a little bit patient, because first the panelists here and Assem in Beirut get a chance to talk about these issues, but we hope that the latest at 10, 3:15, we're done with kind of establishing some lines. We could talk about this for days, I guess, and that we take questions from the floor here, but also online, okay? So from, let's say, 3:05 onwards, you can start really shuffling on your chairs, okay? And getting nervous to remind us of the fact that you want to say things too. All right, having said all this, the first set of topics, okay, is on the underlying aim or benefit on matters related to equality, diversity, inclusivity. And the first question is actually, why? I'm addressing the panelists first, but you can think about it already. Why do you think that equality, diversity, and inclusivity are relevant, more particularly in the academia? Now, don't get me wrong, okay? Those of you who know me, okay, also know how deeply convinced I am that these are very important core values and that they are far from being attained, okay? So my question is not meant to dismiss the topic. My question is meant to help us thinking about it, to then help us gain ground for developing policies. Because if we know why something is relevant or important, we also get a better idea of what to do. My first question to you panelists is, what is relevant about equality, diversity, inclusivity, and especially for who or what are they relevant? Okay, I saw that Reeta is already willing to intervene. Shoot, and then Assem, you second.
Because I'm going to make some challenging statements, so I thought I better start it. I'm the oldest one, so so I don't mind anybody getting upset with me about those questions, those things. I'm glad you said that it is a value and you don't need to discuss it. But I can tell you that the question is really problematic. First of all, I'll begin with the title of the panel. And the title of the panel is Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion. I can tell you, I'm very happy to be here, but I'm also very sad to be here. When we're talking about this issue, which I went through 40 years ago, we are still talking about that issue right now. There's something wrong with the system, right? I hope you'll agree with me. Equality, there is a difference between equality and equity. That's why the EDI really refers to equity rather than equality. Equality is within the liberal framework, fair representation, fair treatment, equality of treatment. Equity is about substantive changes. It tells you that there is something wrong the way people are being treated. So equity is to redress that particular issue and bring about not only impact substantive changes, but also to bring about systemic changes. So I think there is something, I think if ECPR has to do something first, because I think that's what you started with, my suggestion would be to, as political scientists, we know how concepts are important. I'm sure you've all read Sartori. And so concepts are important. So equity. So my first suggestion would be let's review that title if we're going to do something. I think the second, my problem with the relevance part is that I think if we asked that question 40 years ago, I would have been fine, because people didn't talk about diversity as a value, as a positive thing. As democracy, we expect in democracy that everybody is included, right? And so therefore, one should be asking that kind of question, because I feel the onus has been put on me as a brown person, you as a woman, another brown person, brown whatever, to justify why it is relevant. right? I shouldn't be sitting here and justifying and really basically justifying and saying, please make equity an important issue. So I think we have to basically make an assumption very clearly, understanding that how diversity is a value, equity is a value, and how should we do things better rather than asking for relevance. So with that provocative statement, I'm going to leave it there.
Assem, more provocation?
I will follow up. I will not repeat what Reeta said, but I will follow up from that. I was hesitant also to participate for the same reason. Like asking a brown Muslim person to talk about equity. So please recognize us that we are here. But anyways, I think the more important question is, we've been talking about these issues, we've been reading about these issues for the past decades. And what really happened? Why did we fail miserably? And now it is suddenly a very salient issue that everyone is talking about, that all governments are enforcing that on universities. You don't do that, you don't get funding. So what really went wrong? And to be honest, even with all the efforts that are being done, I will give just a small example that was really annoying, is when the Russian invasion of Ukraine started, and we started talking about refugees. Even in our academic environment, we started talking about us versus them. These are not the Syrian refugees, that they are coming from different culture, different background, different race, different color, but they are like us. And when we are discussing this, even at the university level, at the academic level, I was really upset. Like, what are we talking about? Like, you're telling us about equity, diversity, inclusion, and then like, this is the topic we raise, and this is what we talk about. Isn't this like something that we shouldn't even discuss? It's just the basic principle of what we stand for as human beings, as people who believe in democracies. What we have been preaching for a long time about justice, equality, equity, inclusion, human rights, all these values that we stand for, and then we start talking about this us and them thing. And so this is one thing, and the other thing is, we keep talking about like what is being done, why this is important, and I think it is important for many different reasons. Like, we talk about, especially when we talk about universities are supposed to be the minaret for tolerance, acceptance, inclusion, diversity, and we're supposed to be the academics who are helping our students engage in the workforce. So what type of education we are giving them? Universities are, why this is important, I think, because also universities are well placed to decrease these existing equities and inequalities by developing measures to counterbalance existing societal biases and stereotypical views that are held in societies. I have more points, but I will stop here so that others will maybe intervene, and then I can come back to my other points.
Yeah, sure, great. I think a couple of the issues you have raised, and Reeta, you too, actually already refer to, what the underlying causes and problems are, So I guess that many of the things can be brought up then. Shardia or Merli? Shardia, you go, and then Merli. Okay, cool, great.
I'll try and keep it short because I'm very wary of the time, but I do echo what has just been said by the other two panelists, and also just to comment that the fact that a question like that is being asked almost warrants some type of justification, but the fact that a justification is needed kind of lets us know where ED&I is sitting right now within European political science. The fact that that question needs to be asked, and instead of us getting straight into kind of discussion and topics and so on, we're having to waste time on having to define and almost say, you know, this is why I think, you know, topics or issues or concerns that actually matter to all of us is important, and why we need to consider it in our field. We're as I said, we're wasting time in regards to discussing some heavier matters. And just to answer the question, you know, why is it relevant, but also who are we referring to, or who is it relevant for? First of all, this question on the relevance of ED&I is absolutely exhausting. As a Black female academic, to have to keep justifying why something should be spoken about, I cannot explain how emotionally, mentally draining it is to have to keep repeating the same thing. And I haven't been in academia as long as Reeta, for example, but in the short time I have been, I'm already tired of repeating myself. And then also the reason why it is important or relevant is because, as Assem said, you know, we're, as scholars, as academics, we are here in universities providing knowledge and education to students and young people around the world. And the knowledge that is produced within these classrooms, within our modules, our content, it's important that we recognize and acknowledge and have accountability to what we're teaching, but also acknowledge what we're not teaching and what is missing from our content and our discussions. Whether we are experienced or specialists in an area or not, it doesn't give us the right to extract such a core aspect of certain discussions because we don't specialize in it. It's our job to go and find out information about that topic. So we're giving our students a full account. And just to finish, another reason why it's relevant to discuss this topic right now at the conference is so, as I've just identified, as a Black female academics, so that hopefully with change, there doesn't need to be another Black female academic entering a space like this with 2,000 people looking around and being the only one. That's why it's relevant.
Shardia, that was so powerful. Thanks for sharing your experience. I also wanted to tackle the terminology a little bit and just point out that equality assumes sameness, right? So either we're providing the same supports for everyone, which creates surplus for those who don't really need it and might not be enough for those groups who might need even more. At the same time, talking about equality, it erases the complexities that we need to be recognizing and we need to be addressing in our work as researchers and as human beings in academia. So also it assumes that we all want to be equal the same way. And this is problematic because we want to embrace diversity. We don't want to be the same. Diversity is important, right? And the question becomes, according to whose standards we want to be the same. So to conclude, talking about equality, it's useless, it's unhelpful, and it's highly problematic. The other thing that I wanted to address is the idea of inclusion, which can also be problematic. So if we're talking about inclusion, we are inviting everybody to feel comfortable in our space, the space that we have created for ourselves, and assuming that it's fine. It does nothing for the system. We need to change the room, the system, thinking about who is part of creating that different kinds of system that different people feel comfortable in. So inclusion is is also in some sense problematic. There's a lot of complexity and contested ideas when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So the question becomes, do we even want to use the word inclusion? Maybe we wanted to move forward towards this critical idea and talk about the decolonization instead. How can we decolonize our spaces, knowing that academia is a colonized institution to start with? And why do we need EDI? I can give you 3 reasons for that. The first is a humanistic question. Do we care about other people? Do we care about other people? If the answer is yes, we need to be talking about this, and we need to be moving beyond discussion and panels to action. So the second is very rational reason. We have changing demographics. Folks are getting older. We have immigration, where the diversity comes from. Universities are recruiting more and more international students that bring diversity. In the context of Canada, we have Indigenous populations that the numbers are increasing. They are young comparing to the main cultural group. So how can we make sure that our universities are providing relevant education for them so that these groups are becoming the skilled labor, talking about in neoliberal terms, for our economies, for our economic growth? That is for your rational reason. And then finally, the social justice argument. Old ways won't work anymore. So we need to think about how our norms, our attitudes, our behaviors that are ingrained, how can we change those?
Okay, I think those were very many fair points. Raising, yeah, how to put it? Raising, on the one hand, the importance of getting beyond the stage of a panel, you know, but on the other hand, showing that in many cases, we're not yet here, because I can imagine that in this room, many people feel concerned about these issues, okay? But there's A, a difference between feeling concerned and B, doing something, but also look around how many we are here, you know, and how many conference members there are. But also, if you then go back to your institutions and you talk to your colleagues, how many of your colleagues do not think that everything is fine, that the only criteria we use to select people and to promote people and to push people is their qualities, without in any way questioning what their qualities would mean. And that people, even if they have good intentions, still come up, you know, with the most blatant stereotypes without even being aware of them. So for me, it's a tricky thing, because as you said, you know, I mean, these issues have been raised by people decades ago when I was already born, but still very young. And somehow we're still there, you know, and it takes so much time. So there's something, yeah. While it seems superfluous to ask the question, and I agree that we shouldn't use it to justify things. And I fully buy, Assem, what you've been saying, and Shardia, what you've been saying, what all of you've been saying. I still have I wonder what we need to do to kind of get the mainstream with us, you know, and the mainstream in the sense of these comfortable spaces or bubbles that part of academia is for part of us, okay? So, all right, then let's try, you know, a couple of issues have been raised on, definitely issues that explain why we don't have equality, equity, diversity, and inclusive space, okay? And I take all the criticisms you have regarding the terminology, because I think there's also differences between Northern America, for instance, and the UK and a couple of European countries where we tend for different reasons to use equality in terms of equity. But I take, okay, so you use the terminology while knowing that we put it between inverted commas. Thank you very much. And let's put it then this way, you know, is okay, because when we're thinking of if we still have that long way to go, what, I mean, okay, what are the reasons, you know, what explains this lack of a space being more, call it open towards all, okay? What lacks it? And especially, and this is something I'm triggered by, because we've talked about it a little bit over lunch, and Reeta, you said like, oh, but they're all ahead of us, you know, even sociology. Is there something to political science that makes us be so running back, behind? Anybody? You want to go?
We're looking at me, so.
Okay, Assem, you get the second chance.
But I want to take an issue with you because I think before coming here, I was beginning to read some European literature on equity, equality. I think the equity term is being used. EDDI is being used. So I really think, I hope you'll pay the concepts really matter because concepts do determine how we think and how we project. I think there are two, if I were to go to the causes, I think look at one of the larger context in general, and one maybe in particular to political science. And, you know, I've been working in North America mostly, so forgive me if any of the examples are from that side. I think history matters, the past matters. And I'm very committed to the idea that we cannot change the present without really talking about the past. And when I say history matters, past matters, I'm really thinking, I'm a good, solid institutionalist. So a new institutionalist, historical and sociological institute. I think institutions, political and the other institutions, particularly our legal regimes and citizenship regimes, have really created institutions, and there's a kind of path dependency to them, which has led to led to social exclusion, status, privilege, and a hierarchy. And despite the changes in policies, which we are seeing in last 20, 25 years or so during my administrative career, and diversity has been put on the agenda, you know, whether we want to call it equality, diversity, equity has been put on the agenda. But despite that, what you find is there's a really institutional stickiness. There is a racial gender imbalance deficit, you can call it, in leadership, underrepresentation, and let me use the word. The result is a very racial form of whitewashing that has emerged, and it is you know, a white world, and then in this white world, there is an erasure of people of color, erasing of their history, their narratives, you know, as you spoke about the indigenous community, their traditions, their knowledge structures in North America, and there's, as I said, lack of representation, and moreover, there is this insider-outsider theme which has really permeated throughout the institutions. I can tell you, even in my previous, you know, before I went back to the department, I was referred to one of the my big bosses. He won't, whether it's president or chancellor, I won't tell you. But in disagreement, he basically said, "You're an outsider. You're an outsider." And I was just kind of taken aback. What does this word outsider mean? And I started beginning to think and said outsider was a label for various things. I was a woman from third world, brown color. I was not from the institution. I had come from outside, different institution to take over the job. I was, my leadership style was a female kind of leadership style, probably considered aggressive. So everything kind of was labeled under the word outsider. So there's this insider-outsider stuff has really, really emerged. So within that larger context, I think the development institution, universities are really conservative places. They are political sites with really, and they resist change. It's amazing that universities have lagged behind government initiative and even corporation initiatives, and they have been very resistant to change. And so universities are latecomers. And moreover, what has happened is that even when the universities have gone on the agenda of diversity, there is a huge gap between policies and their implementation. There's a lot of rhetoric, diversity rhetoric, but not much real change which has happened. I mean, look at our field in political science, as you, Petra, you were mentioning, we have still imbalance in terms of representation of women and women of color. They are not very much there. There's a power disparity. So, and moreover, what I found as a person, I never used to think of myself as a person of color. But in Canada, we have a category called visible minority. And I felt legally racialized. I had to adopt that terminology for myself. I'm, defining, and often in discussions, I would say to the audience, and I said, "Why do you call me visible minority?" And actually, I'm invisible, and you are the visible majority. So it's really the academy is really very, very conservative, and there's such a gap. And then gap is also what, I've recently written a paper, it's called the equity myth. Is equity promised, but equity denied? So it doesn't exist. So huge power disparity. So I would say that's a broader general cause. In political science, the issues are even more dramatic. Political science, I would give you three reasons. The first reason in political science is the words political and science. Right? Both two words have a very, very narrow definition. What we mean by political is very narrow. But as you mentioned, Petra, I mentioned in the lunchtime, political science has been very not open at all, maybe less open as compared to, let's say, sociology, anthropology, history, and incorporating, for example, gender, race, decolonization, indigeneity. And so the word political is very, very narrowly defined, and we stuck to a narrow definition. Similarly, the word science is narrowly defined. And when I describe the status of political science, I forgot to tell you that I was also the president of Canadian Political Science Association in 2010 and 11. And in my discussion, basically, I defined political science, the way it has developed at least in Canada or in North America, that there are two boxes. One is the hegemonic box, which is the scientific box after post-behavioral, behavioral revolution. So we have stuck to that hegemonic box, although there have been lots of discussions about qualitative, quantitative research. We've had, and then the other box is the critical theory box, where you have the critical race theory, gender and politics, you have indigeneity, post-colonial studies. Only those critical theories have been allowed to enter into the hegemonic box, the ones who confine them, who basically adhere to the scientific epistemology. So for example, in my field, comparative politics, we have comparative politics of gender. And of course, our feminist institutionalism. They have adhered to, more or less, the scientific contours and framework of political science. And then you have the other critical theorists who are talk to themselves, play with themselves, and there is just no engagement between the two. There's absolutely, the only people who are allowed in are the ones who will adhere to the methodological issues. So there is this narrowness definition of both science and political. So I think that's the fundamental problem. The second problem, which really is the concept of excellence. Who is a first-rate political scientist? And in that one, the excellence has been defined within this hegemonic scientific box, and it basically says which journals you can publish, what kind of research you're going to do, how much citation you are having, the journals which have what is the impact level. And so what it does is that people who really do not agree with the epistemological and scientific approach land up getting outside and publish in interdisciplinary journals, area studies journals, or they leave political science department. You're going to hear it from my colleagues here. And excellence within this framework, diversity is considered as a trade-off. If you have diversity, somehow you're going to abandon excellence. So you're going to abandon rigor, you're going to abandon the purity of political science, you're going to abandon the prestige which we have acquired, the physics enemy, which I think one of our comparative politics also did. And I think the third reason is the impact of neoliberalism. And we can talk about that because universities have become big corporate part of corporatization, increasing recruitment, teaching students, because in Canada, we really are dependent upon the government for funding and private funding. So more the universities require money, more they want to basically adhere to a corporate model of what kind of students they want to create is basically training for skills. And so I would say those are the three big reasons why we are in trouble.
That puts a lot on the table. Assem, you have as much to put on the table as well?
Yeah, Reeta mentioned everything, like almost. I think the biggest problem we face is the top-down approach that is used, and talking about the problem more generally. And I think the key is to accept others and not really try to make them look like us or be like us or be like the like white Caucasian academic, etc. And I think this is one of the biggest issues when it comes to promoting or equity, diversity, etc. And the second problem is we recently, like the issue of decolonizing not only our understanding of things, but also the literature, decolonizing the literature. The calls for that is more recent than it should have happened a while ago. So we still teach our students a lot of literature based on, you can call it colonial understandings or colonial ideas, etc. But this is also one of the issues that we face. Another reason that also I think Reeta mentioned is publish or perish in academia, and especially in our departments. Like you publish what journal you're publishing in. This competition to publish in top-tier journals, you don't have any time to think about other issues. But the problem also, this creates two issues. One is that, okay, it's either or. So either I focus on diversity, inclusiveness, etc., and try to, but does it have to be like either or can we build inclusivity into the teaching, research, design of research and innovation programs, taking into account the considerations of minorities, sex, gender, minority perspective, in terms of research questions, in terms of methods, in terms of processes. And I think this have not been sufficiently central to the effort to address issues related to diversity, inclusion, equity. And I think this is one of the problems that we face. Like, I don't have time to talk about anything else. I don't have time to try to include new types of research that I want to get this article published in this journal because this will get me like one stage higher. And this is, so this is also another thing. Also, when it comes to one of the issues that we face is the differences between in the political science departments. Even within the same department, you see a lot of divisions. Like where I studied, for example, IR scholars or IR students are not really, don't like theory driven students don't consider the IR to be like really political science or part of political science, or comparative politics is not really part of this thing. So we also have our divisions internally in terms of political science that doesn't allow for more inclusion and more cooperation in terms of collaborating on these issues. And I think also the focus at the broader level, the focus of many efforts has been either we focus on staff issues, you apply for research and then you have to include something on equity, inclusiveness, diversity as part of your research project because it's a requirement. But this is also problematic because I should believe in that. I should believe in accepting everyone regardless of their color, their skin, their gender, their whatever. But because it is enforced on us from the higher levels, even when you apply for grants, yeah, I have to stick it somewhere in my research, in my grant application. And this doesn't really help the cause. And I think it's the other thing is focusing on many efforts has been either on staff or students. And I think it should be the entire university community collaboration across the departments, across faculties, but also there should be more collaboration across universities when it comes to this. And this is something that we still don't see much in the academia.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll give you the floor too. I think there's one easy illustration also to add to both what Assem, you and Reeta, you have said, when is research to be considered research by whom? You know, the very simple fact that when certain people investigate an issue, it is considered to be research. And when other people investigate the same issue, it is kind of considered academic activism. You see what I mean? This also adds to the whole story. Yeah, and it's a very easy example to give, you know, but it's very, very telling. Merli, Shardia, do you want to add something? I don't know who in what order.
Yeah, just wanted to ask you, audience, are you feeling uncomfortable already? Because if you're not feeling uncomfortable, you're not doing it right. So it's important to have these difficult, uncomfortable conversations, I find. I wanted to also speak about the fact that academia has been and is functioning currently as a colonial institution from the get-go. So what do I mean by this? Academia has marginalized and excluded and overlooked anything other than the dominant Western scientific knowledge or Eurocentric intellectual traditions. And so I think there is an important conversation to be had to find the balance between the Western scientific ways and other ways of knowing and being in order to really address the idea of academic colonialism. One book that I really liked talks about epistemic ignorance. by Reina Koukanen. She's a Finnish researcher, and the title of the book is Reshaping the University. And she talks about the idea around epistemic ignorance, really tackling that idea of prevailing indifference of any other knowledge tradition that comes outside of the Western scientific knowledge, just not being interested, not really caring. The fact that you are here in this panel and you're participating actively is really, I applaud you for that, because you're interested, you want to know more, but where's the rest of the ECPR? And is it relevant only for you who are in the audience and for us who are sitting here, or is it a broader issue, and why there are not more people here? I also wanted to mention that in terms of underlying causes and problems, racism, for example, and it's not just one incident. When we're speaking about racism, it's a systemic and structural issue. And I really like the metaphor put forward by scholar Marilyn Fry, who talks about a bird cage. And the bird is sitting in the cage, and you are somebody who is looking from outside towards the bird. And, there's the cage where each wire reinforces the others and strengthens the cage. But if you are standing very close, you're not really seeing the whole system, the whole structure. You might only be seeing the two wires that are closest to you, when you're looking. And when you're looking at the bird, you're thinking, why the bird is complaining, why the bird is not flying away, not seeing the cage around it, right? And also maybe thinking maybe they like to be there at the first place, right? So, so this privilege that we have as the white people, it kind of obscures our vision, and we're not seeing that cage. We're too close to it. And we only might be seeing the bars closest to us and, don't understand the experiences of others. So we need to step back and identify the bars nearest us and work towards deconstructing them. So that's why there is often this training towards unconscious bias, because, we all want to be good people. We are not racist. We're good people. But it's unconsciously what we are doing and not even meaning anything harmful that might create these conditions for marginalized groups, for example. Yeah, I'm going to stop here.
And I just want to pick up on what all three of the panelists have said, and talking about history and colonialism, and this kind of pinpoints that political science is not an isolated discipline in regards to issues with ED&I and so on. We also have to remember that when we talk about history and we talk about colonialism, these are legacies that have been put in place. These are centuries worth of institutionalized, structured legacies that have been created to keep certain people out. And so that's what we're fighting against. So I think that's really important to remember that as well. It's not there as I'm not saying that as an excuse at all, but the same way it's taken centuries to put in place, it hurts me to say it may take centuries to start to undo, unravel and redo, so that we end up in a better position than we're in now. And picking up on what Reeta was talking about in regards to, being an outsider within, I think I often kind of get that label attached to me as well. And coincidentally, flying over to Innsbruck, I was reading a book called Space Invaders. I'm still reading it. I've got it here, by Nirmal Pawar. And the author talks about this idea of having a fear of infusion. And I think potentially that's where political science is in comparison to some other disciplines, that there is almost a fear that if we start to not only include, but infuse ourselves together in regards to ED&I. And ED&I doesn't just mean race as well. We've got to get that put forward as well. ED&I is all others that have been excluded historically from the very system that we work in, that we're trying to change. And it's almost, as I said, like a fear of what's going to happen if we start to include more women, or what's going to happen if we start to include more brown people, and the fear of the unknown, which as humans we all can kind of relate to. But it does bring me on to that idea of, because that fear is there, it does filter into, as Reeta was saying, around excellence and what is and who is classed as excellence within political science specifically. And we see it obviously in regards to research and research grants, and there's been a few publications on that, but also in regards to publications and who is getting published where and why. And unfortunately, from a personal perspective, that left me leaving political science and moving to sociology. And it's a weird position to be in, because my work is political sociology. Even right now, I'm looking at 2.6 million speeches from Hansard. If that's not political science, I'm not sure what is. But because what I'm doing with it is potentially not seen as excellence, it's not being accepted, there's no interest. Sociology welcomes it with open arms. And I think that's what, as political scientists or as political science institutions, we need to be quite careful, because you'll end up losing key people in the discipline just because of we're unable to change who and what we see as excellence. And then just to finish off, Petra was talking about kind of whose knowledge is seen as knowledge. And if someone does a piece of research, it's seen as excellence, gets published and so on, and somebody who is not historically supposed to be attached to that discipline does the exact same research, that's not seen as knowledge. And I've seen that continuously when we talk about approaches to political science, especially intersectionality, where scholarship and research on intersectionality has been done by people of color, women of color within political science. And that scholarship does not get picked up. That research is not seen as something pinnacle, but the same scholarship can get, the same research or research interest can get done by a white female academic, and that research will get published. Again, there's a body of literature on that as well. So these are the conversations that we need to be having. And when when the question was asked to you, do you feel uncomfortable? It's not about potentially deliberately making you uncomfortable, but these conversations are uncomfortable to be had for many. And unfortunately, there's people in this room that have felt uncomfortable in political science and political science spaces for years. So in order to kind of limit, reduce, and may I hope get rid of that uncomfortableness, we need to keep talking.
Yeah, thank you. What always strikes me is that when you talk to certain people, the problem seems so obvious. And then when you talk to many other people, they don't even see it, And then, I mean, because like there's one of the simple, I mean, a very easy question you sometimes get, and you might perhaps have gotten to that comment, is that people then look at you and say like, well, we got you. Yeah. And then you say, yeah. But when will you start seeing me as an academic?
And that's quite problematic, because I do not and I cannot speak for all Black females in political science or academia in general. But I've ticked a box, and for many, box tickers and form pushers, that's their job done. But from my perspective, it's nowhere near enough. I shouldn't even be, out of, I'm just plucking the 2000 number out, because I think that's how many we've got here today. 1 or 2 out of 2,000. That's the type of percentage, if you were doing research, you probably wouldn't even give it your attention in regards to pulling it in your data, but that is the data that needs attention.
What should we do first?
I'm letting the younger folks go first because
That's-
I've done it.
You've done it. Okay, good. Yeah, and we inversed a bit the order of who is going to speak first. Who wants to speak first? What? And then we should give the audience
I can go ahead.
a chance too, because I promised that you could start shuffling on your chairs from now on. So bear a couple of more minutes before you get the floor.
So,
Merli.
yeah. Question. What is common between Lizzo, Beyonce, and European Journal of Political Research? Any guesses? So they're all trying to move away from the ableist language. We talked about race a lot. One group within the EDI categories, if you will, that is not talked enough about is ability/disability, right? So moving away from this language of a blind peer review, and before coming here, I checked the journal's website, and on the first page, they talk nicely about anonymized review as opposed to blind review. When I dig a little bit deeper, they still have blind review there. They have the journal operates as blinded peer review policy, following a blinded peer review policy. But, you know, we're moving towards abandoning this ableist language, right? So this is wonderful, but just drawing attention to the power of words here and the language that we are using. Again, unconscious bias, maybe. What needs to change? I think one important point of action or item of action is to try to figure out your strategic direction in terms of EDI and develop a policy, guideline, framework, wherever you want to start, that really targets equity, diversity, inclusion / decolonization. Then what we all can do, going back to that policy piece, you know, when you have a strategic priority clearly vocalized and articulated, then it gives power. That document gives power and gives direction in terms of linking it with an action as well. So if you prioritize this, like we have this panel today, it's the featured roundtable. It's a wonderful first step. But also think about the idea around equity as inclusion versus equity as fairness, because it gives different focus on education, on policies in general. If we're talking about equity as inclusion, we're kind of ameliorating the negative influence of social and cultural difference. We're inviting everyone to our space. If we're focusing on equity as fairness, it focuses on redistribution of power, and maybe that's what needs to happen. We need to think about who is representing our organization, ECPR, who are the people who are making decisions, is diversity is represented there. So what else I have here? Learn about whiteness, engage in this deep norm-altering level of learning, try to overcome the resistance of not wanting to learn about the difference of knowledge and knowledge hierarchies in general. And no, I think that's it, more or less. As the first steps.
Or Ed.
What can you do to change, or what are the first steps? I do think it's a micro macro solution, micro being you personally, in your positions, in your roles, however junior or senior. If you start to look at what you can do, your responsibility, looking at your course contents, looking at your hiring policies, looking at who are your research participants, for example, from a micro level, then ultimately it will impact and affect the macro. And in affecting the macro, potentially you will start to see differences cropping up in regards to celebration of ED&I work within ECPR, celebration in regards to, not only research on ED&I, but also the awardees having an ED&I aspect to them as well. And as was mentioned, ED&I, and I said it again, does not just mean race, it does mean disability, it does mean, different levels of scholarship in regards to junior and senior and so on. And I think, for example, the very people who we're talking about in regards to ED&I, when we're talking about gender, when we're talking about race, when we're talking about disability or ability, they can help with making some changes, like panels like this. We can support initiatives and new frameworks and so on. However, we cannot do this for free. We cannot do it continuously. We can, and when I mean free, it's not always a monetary payment. It's also acknowledgement of what you're doing. And that also needs to be a change, because as I said, right from the beginning of this panel, it's exhausting mentally, emotionally, which therefore impacts the physical as well. And so as together individually, which will impact the macro, which and supporting and getting that help from people who have the expertise, knowledge and experience, hopefully we can start to make some changes that we need.
Thank you. Assem, Reeta said she would let the younger persons go first. I think you're a bit younger than she is, so.
I think there's a long way to take in order to move forward in the direction of acceptance, tolerance, inclusivity, and I think it starts at many different levels. Like we can talk about the leadership positions in which they can be more open, more inclusive, more applying more inclusive policies to everyone. We can talk about the educational curriculums that should be also, especially when we're talking about the westernized, Europeanized, or oriented type of articles of research that we are familiar with, we assign to our students. And I think we should move a little bit away from that, because there is a wide range of publications that are written and are published by outside the Western oriented type of journals. But also one of the problems that we face is we are also in our mindset, I can't say we are victims of this Western oriented approaches, but we do tend to, because you want to get published, so you end up doing whatever is required to get the things out. And I think this is one of the issues. More open discussions can be held, because sometimes in the same department, in the same faculty, not taking consideration to tiny things like, for example, religious holidays of other colleagues, fasting of other colleagues, and then you host an event during the same time, and then why you didn't come to this event? You feel yourself you're excluded. But yeah, I was, oh, sorry, we didn't think about that. And I think these tiny things should not happen. Last but not least, I think by opening universities to everyone who has the talent, capacity, irrespective of their social class, identity, sexual orientation, cultural background, age, where they come from, I think will help strengthen the social cohesion, and at the same time will enhance the capacity for original research, more collaboration across different different groups, different staff members. And also, I think by creating inclusive research and more innovative programs in our educational systems will make universities more attractive and will attract a broader range of students and scholars. And by doing this with our students, enabling them teach all our students how awareness of diversity affects the way they will be they work and acknowledge the full range of talents they develop. I think this will help them also in the working environment once they graduate. And I think it is a good starting point to discuss these things and to shed light on the various issues related to diversity, inclusiveness, equity, even equality. And the key is not to try to make everyone looks like the others, but like to accept others as they are, based regardless of their color, regardless of their race, regardless of their religion, ethnicity, etc., etc.
I'm just going to quickly make a couple of points. Adding on to what all three of them said, I can tell you that I've done various roles from chair to dean to vice president, provost. I'll tell you the change begins at the department level. So it has to be at the department level, where in terms of making changes in faculty hiring, with regard to the rules of the game, with regard to tenure, promotion, mentoring of different marginalized groups, whether they're men, women, able-bodied or not able-bodied. So I think the change begins at the department level. The other thing of what I was going to suggest was that each subfield or sector, there has to be sectoral leadership. And sectorally within our political science, we know that we are divided in subfield. We should do self-reflection. What is our problem? Where does the problem lie? And how we can change it. So it has got to be an individualized response. If in Canadian Political Science Association, following Assem, the ECPR can do a big service. If you look at their website, what they have developed is a resource for equity, for decolonization, and have recommended that whole curriculum to be integrated instead of ghettoizing, creating a course on indigenous politics or gender and politics, integrate the whole literature on equity and marginalization, decolonization in the stuff. And the last thing which I can tell you that right now, we are in Canadian Journal of Political Science, we're looking for a new editorial committee, which we want to see how they are going to reinvent the journal, because we would like to see the journal responding to diversity of methodologies, diversity of perspectives, epistemologically welcoming different stuff. So all those changes can take place. So here.
Okay, thank you. Dear audience, anybody wants? Okay, I decided with the people walking around the mics that they just pick and choose people to answer questions. So audience, if you want to say something, raise your hand very nicely so that they can really see you. And please say who you are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Margot. I'm a fellow Canadian political scientist from the University of Alberta. Thank you all for your very compelling remarks. And I was especially pleased to hear robust critiques of even the title of the panel to begin with. That was really heartening. Reeta, I would really benefit from an overhaul of CJPS and what it wants to publish. But extending from your final remarks about departmental change, my hope, I suppose it's a suggestion, is that ECPR does not download the responsibility for demonstration of EDI onto participants. So of course it is important, but my hope is that administratively, these are considerations that are taken seriously when selecting which papers or selecting an institution as host, or which panels are in the basement in a building far away or which panels are in the middle of the day in a central location. I think I see a similar trend in Canadian institutions anyway in hiring, that they're asking for applicants to state their EDI commitments. And I think, of course, it's important that we take seriously that applicants can make those demonstrations, but more importantly that, or equally importantly perhaps, that institutions are demonstrating to its community members and to its participants what it's doing for EDI.
I have one point that I wanted. Thank you so much for your comment. And there was one point that I wanted to mention in regards to the hiring practices. What we are seeing a lot happening is hiring that one Black researcher, hiring that one token Indigenous researcher, and planting it to the department that has no support in terms of supporting that person moving forward and being successful in their career. So an example of a different approach that I've noticed among Canadian universities is the cluster hire, where you're hiring 5 or more people at the same time, whether they're being somebody who's engaging in anti-racism work or Indigenous or whatever you have. And then because when they're coming in as a group, it's creating a critical mass, and it puts pressure on the leadership as well to make sure that there are supports available, that there is a system that is supporting and making sure that they're succeeding in their career. Thanks for saying the good, positive things.
I'm Thomas Salford. I'm one of the other members of the executive committee here, and I'm Professor of Comparative Politics at the University of Bamberg. I've personally, I'm grateful for all of you to sit and speak to us about these really important issues. I myself had a chance to recruit a lot of women and non-whites from Africa and from India, and from Africa and India the most, in the past decade, and they all have their PhDs, and most of them have moved on to good jobs in Europe or back home, as it were. So I'm very proud of one of my first tutees when I was at the University of Kent, who is now an MP in the House of Commons, one of the growing number of Black members of Parliament with a Ghanaian background. I listened to this, and my question is this: as somebody responsible in ECPR, there are lots of little things we can do, and there are lots of things we can do back home. A lot of the things that we can do and will do depend on national legislation or European Union soft law. I mean, there is in pretty much every single EU member state some form of legislation for inclusion, against discrimination. It's the whole arsenal of legal tools is strongest, I think, in the context of gender, and so on. So there is that. Nevertheless, improvements are slow. Okay. So but it will depend, as Reeta said, much on departments and their ability to recruit, or the willingness to recruit. Now, what shall we do as ECPR? Because what we're talking about here is almost irrelevant to national contexts. It's when I go back, I'm bound by the rules and laws of the state of Bavaria, by the rules of the European Union, but the rules of my research councils and so on. What can we do here to instigate change further down? I mean, geographically now. That is because we're an association or not a professional body in a national sense. We're not hiring. We're not interfering in hirings. So that is my question to you.
Yeah, I think we have to get a few questions because otherwise we will never make it. Okay, perhaps raise your hands and then we collect like you and you and you. I see 4 hands up, so 4 questions, okay?
So it's more of a comment. I hope that's okay. My name is Miriam Fischer. I'm from the University of Cologne in Germany, and I'm a sociologist undercover at your conference. And I wanted to share a maybe small seeming strategy that I see increasingly used in sociology in quantitative work. So it's a small thing, but if you, for example, reverse reference categories, normally work on gender has a variable 0 is men reference category, 1 is woman, and then the paper becomes about female disadvantage, female experience, and it's kind of reinforces this idea that gender topics are about women, that gender topics are about trans people, and that then makes trans researchers, women researchers, quote unquote, too close to the subject to really have a quote unquote objective view on it. Nobody says objective, but we all think it in the quantitative sciences. It's terrible. So one thing that we do increasingly is we reverse it. So we have the reference category as woman, trans person, and the one is men, and the paper becomes about men. It becomes about their privilege, and it also makes men visible as somebody who is and men as somebody who is part of the power distribution. And in the long run, hopefully, if we see this more and more, we also realize that men do not have some sort of distance either to the topic. And we sort of hopefully slowly could move away from perceiving research done from a male perspective as sort of good science. And then, you know, you can apply this to any other topic. But this is something I see increasingly being done, and I just wanted to share that.
Thank you very much for sharing with us your ideas and thoughts. I am Camilo. I am a PhD student in politics. This is my first time here in France. And I was wondering if you can say something about alternatives to the university, to the idea of the university, because as far as I understand, there are proposals for pluriversities or even subversities in the Global South. So I was wondering if perhaps there is something also about the very way we produce knowledge in universities that is intrinsically problematic. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very thought-provoking and problematic and comfortable discussion, I guess. I don't know whether my comment or question would make us even more uncomfortable. It is sort of provoked by the concept that was mentioned towards the end of the discussion, and this is fairness in relation to diversity. And as diverse as we are, who are sitting in this room, if we want to open up the concept of diversity, I wanted to point out to a couple of similarities of all of us sitting here. We are all healthy enough to have been able to travel here. We all do not have care responsibilities that would have prevented us from traveling here. And we all are affiliated with institutions who could afford paying the fee to participate in this conference, speaking of what ECPR could be doing. So in a system that is inherently based on competition, we all have competitive advantages in comparison to those who are not here today, who would have liked to maybe. So how in this system that is extremely competitive, extremely meritocracy driven, to accommodate the concept of fairness and how to bring it into this system, considering that fairness is also a very individualistic concept. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Elena. I'm from the University of Trento. Just a short comment from someone like myself who has recently exit the precarious state and has stumbled into a permanent position and in a set of responsibilities that I'm finding hard to manage, such as running a master program on data science. As a woman in a very, as a sociologist in a field that it's different from mine, with the vision of a data science that, for example, is a little bit eccentric with respect to what that discipline is becoming. What I think someone like myself has no power whatsoever of hiring people, changing the rules, let alone changing be structural rules, but we do have a vision. And I don't think that like having a system that it's constraining has ever prevented counter action to take place. So I don't think that we should like shield ourselves behind the fact that we work in a system that it's working against a different project or an alternative project. So all this premise just to say that I think that what I fear the most with respect to what you're saying is that not only the labor that you're doing here teaching us once again more that this is a problem and that we should face that problem is also like we miss the resources sometimes, the human resources to keep on doing that type of labor that we're doing also like at the very bottom of the scale in running this students programs and facing new responsibilities. And what I fear the most is that we have assemblies like this ones in which we definitely establish a link and we have a spark and we establish like sense of connectedness, and then we go back where we come from, and that sense of togetherness is kind of lost. So mine is probably most a request, I don't know, to the ECPR. Now there's this working group, but how do we turn that working group in like a spark for building a community of support that I think we need on a daily basis? Because I can learn from all the things that you've been saying to us today, and also from the advices that you've given us about stuff to read and all of that. But then I don't want to be fighting this battle alone. I need others. I need a community. So is this a place where we start building a community?
Okay.
Thank you, Maren Romer from University of Birmingham. I thank you very much for, putting in the emotional and intellectual labor to the panelists. The thing that struck me is that all of you who are here are not only visible minorities or women, but also from British, Canadian, and US institutions. And I think there's a danger in continental Europe that we look at the situation there and say, okay, they are dealing with issues. Colonialism isn't something that concerns us in continental Europe. We do not need to decolonize. This doesn't apply to our national contexts. We have different national contexts. I see this as a German in the UK, where a lot of Germans in the UK are very aware of racism in the UK, but are somehow unable to recognize it in their own context. So yeah, it's just an observation that this is also something that I think we need to broaden. We need to get other people to think and to talk about these issues.
Hiya, I'm Sue from the University of Trento, and this is going to be a critical comment, so sorry, it's not going to make me popular. I very much appreciate being here and watching this session, and I've already heard so many great things. And when the question comes up of what does a body like the ECPR do to make advances in this area, I tend to think there is a lot, actually, because I tend to think that as much as we like to see academia as diverse, it's not, because looking at the life experiences alone, academic institutions are very privileged institutions, and everyone from diverse backgrounds has to fit a certain role to be able to be successful in these institutions. And I find even though we see that academic institutions are becoming much more aware of the need for diversity, I don't find that we as academics understand diversity. I don't think we have a nuanced understanding of it, and I don't think we're very well educated on this either. And I think some of the comments already go to show this, that we miss certain aspects of diversity, but also an understanding of what minority means and distinguishing between different regions of the world, and not just in hiring processes, but across academic culture, because academic culture in itself is the problem. We see this in everything from questions that shouldn't be asked, terms that shouldn't be used, how knowledge is built into even social aspects of academic life, or even quizzes in conferences or academic institutions built on knowledge only created in Western economies. And I would personally like to see tools and content, because I know we like to educate students a lot on what to do and give guidance. And maybe I have not been in the right places, but I don't see the guidance for academics on behavioral issues, on tackling own biases. I find that this is something we do voluntarily because we're interested, but I would like to see the tools in whatever form, things that give us guidance and then help us educate ourselves on these issues.
Okay, thank you. There's two comments from the online community. First of all, Elena, as an answer to you, Amy Verdong is telling that anyone wanting to contact us about how to move forward and how to get support and to get things doing together can contact Amy Verdong. Okay, good. So that's settled. And then there was another question on in relation to there being few women and how to get more women in. Okay. I think we ran too much out of time. Answer, sorry, in detail. Thank you, Shardia. We'll take all of this with us as much as we will take all of what has been said over the last hour and a half with us. But I would like to give the four panelists a chance to kind of say a last word. Okay, and Assem, if it's okay with you, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Thanks. I will be very short. I think the question of how to produce knowledge at university need to be addressed at the different institutions and the type of educational material we give our students and how we teach our students and how we produce knowledge. And all this has to be critically reflected on, whether we move for a more problem-based learning or something else, but also this relates to our admission policies and how we admit our students based on what. And because if we're talking about biases or stereotypes, this starts already from the admission procedure, and this has to be tackled. I think there need to be also like for more tolerance and like more diverse, like more understanding, more acceptance, and more educational learning for us in the academia, among our colleagues, to understand all these differences that we have. Because otherwise, if we cannot really understand our differences and accept each other as we are, like whether we come from different, whatever differences we have, I think then we cannot deliver the message to our students. And last but not least, I think also in terms of diversity, equity, inclusiveness, this also relates to the hiring process at the different institutions. Like we shouldn't hire like, because we need someone from the visible minority, we call whatever you want to call it, that we hire someone from that minority or from different background or different color, because we have to do that for our institute, but we have to mean it. And if we hire someone from less privileged places, we need to give them the support and not leave them on their own. And I think there's a long way to take, especially in our in the academic environment. And I will conclude with that. I think we have been very, very late compared to other private sectors and companies who took the lead, and we should be ashamed of ourselves, because we should be the ones who take the lead in this on these issues. And thank you.
From all the comments and the questions that were asked, I think going forward in kind of a final remark would be, as academics, you know, many of us form our own research based off what we read, what we see. And I think that's what's potentially missing from ECPR, is a tangible document or some type of research-led report on what does ED&I look like in ECPR. And you know, that would mean a funded priority, and not a quick fix. It's going to take a while to generate this information, data, quantitative and qualitative, so then we've got something to start working towards or working on. I think that would be a good step forward, building off, of course, the already existing chapter in the 50th anniversary book that I've co-authored on these issues. Yeah.
So I wanted to tackle the idea around why can't we do something, because there are legal regulations, there's this bureaucracy, there are laws. It's a deficit-based perspective. We as researchers, we have amazing power. I mean, policies tend to be reactive. Research needs to be proactive. So in your research work, try to apply that critical lens that helps to shape the norms, values, and behaviors that we have not problematized yet, but we need to be problematizing. So as a researchers, we have immense power. Let's use it together. And in terms of what can we do as a teacher in my classes, this is my first ECPR conference. I encourage all of you political researchers to go out from your field and explore the literature, the research that has been done and is currently being conducted outside of political research. Come to ARA in Chicago 2023, in April 2023. That's the biggest educational research conference in North America. And you will get your mind blown by the critical research that has been done there in terms of what can we do to learn more. Thank you.
Just a very quick word. There is so much brain power here. Now, I'm not saying only in this room, everywhere in this conference. So if I were in ECPR, I would basically, as Shardia recommended, create a document, problematize the issue, and come together. There is so much research done. I mean, I don't work on diversity, but going through, if you look research on equity, gender, political science, you will find at least minimum 50 excellent articles. Put those together, put it on your site, let people read them and see what is being discussed. What are the issues which are discussed and how the issue is being problematized? I would do that. So I think that would be a first step even before you go into doing critical analysis and seeing. So let's inform each other what is being talked about. I think that will change the academic culture. So I can tell you, I've been involved in Canadian Political Science Associations for a long period of time. The Canadian Political Science Association in 1970s, some strong female academics like Jill Vickers and few others started talking about gender. And over the years, when I was a chair and then as a dean came back to the Canadian Political Science, we started collecting data in terms of how many female students we have, graduate students, how many are getting jobs, how many are journal articles they are putting in main journals, what kind of journals they're doing. Are they going to interdisciplinary journals? Are they being labeled themselves self-censorship? Are the journals labeling them? Who are the referees in the Canadian Journal of Political Science? We talked about that. We started collecting all sorts of data, although I must say the response was not good in the beginning, but people started getting on board. So data collection is very, very important to make further analysis. As I mentioned before, it's and I'm going to follow up on Assem's curriculum changes are absolutely essential. If we are teaching our students political science in very first year undergraduate class, I would basically give them what are the mainstream approaches and what are the critical approaches. Do not wait for create a course on intersectionality. Basically let our students learn. We have to teach them the things which they don't know. So really we have to pay attention to what we are teaching, how we are teaching. And I find, for example, we are ghettoizing race, gender, indigeneity in a kind of very special courses. No, have that critical engagement within there. I think that's something. And something which somebody talked about, capacity building is very important. I don't know what ECPR does, but Canadian Political Science Association has had a women's caucus and it has worked extremely well. And I can tell you when I was a chair of the department, I was asked to build the department. And I was telling my colleagues, I hired 24 tenure track people. And where did I go first? I went to the Women's Caucus in Canadian Political Science annual meeting and basically talked about what kind of jobs were coming up, how should they apply, basically informing that there is a job market there. And it's not only informing them, but you have to teach the marginalized groups, basically mentor them how to write write a letter of application, how to basically prepare for job talks, what is being expected. And once you hire them, take them through success through their tenure. So all sorts of things can be done. ECPR can actually take actions. Canadian Journal, Canadian Political Science Association has that whole curriculum guide resource over there, basically saying, how do you integrate all that material? So there are a variety of things can be done, but let's not get bogged down by the national legal requirements. They are going to be there. We need to change the norms. It's not the institution as much as the norms which have to be changed. So those are the few things I would suggest.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all online and in the room for being here with us, for your suggestions, questions, comments. Thank you all for being here with us.